Okay, friends, hello. Joyful hellos, meaningful hellos, hello. Can everybody hear me in the back? Great. I can hear you. Nancy can hear me, super, super. All right, so this panel, again, welcome, and thanks again to the Delaware Contemporary for hosting this marvelous conference to talk about play and the intersections also that contemporary art and also children's museums have together. I think that's very interesting. But this panel in particular, we are going to talk about the importance of play, what play means to us as professionals, and also some about the infrastructures around play, and the infrastructures that we need, the infrastructures that we don't have, who has access to that, who does not have access to that. So we're going to be a little informal here and kind of talk. This is going to be a conversation with friends. Yes, with friends. And so first of all, just want to make sure. So my name is Jen Bush. I am the executive director at the Delaware Children's Museum. Yay! Yes. Yay. Thank you. I just want to also make sure you know I am not Dr. Jen Bush. I was slapped. Just have to make sure I fess up with that. It's Dr. Jen Zosh and Princess Jen Bush. So Jen Bush, and I'm the executive director at the Delaware Children's Museum. I worked at Please Touch Museum. I had the privilege of doing that for over a decade, and I now have been at the Delaware Children's Museum for over 11 years. So the Children's Museum just celebrated our 12th birthday, so we're now 12. We're a dozen years, yes. And interestingly, I worked at Please Touch Museum when the Delaware Children's Museum was opening, and we all came to support and cheer, and we also had many, many meetings with board and staff at the Delaware Children's Museum when we were at Please Touch Museum. So really, it's a labor of love, and always making sure that we're sharing, caring, and talking. So I'm Jen Bush, and I'd like to introduce you to three amazing leaders and helpers. You'll hear me talk a lot about Mr. Rogers. I happen to love Mr. Rogers. Oh, yay, you love Mr. Rogers too. Oh, yay. So Mr. Rogers was quoted as saying once, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" So up on this stage, we've got three helpers. We've got three leaders and three helpers. And I will let that quote sink in, how appropriate that is today, right? So I'd like to introduce these three friends that I have up on this stage. We have Mr. Ian Smith.
Hello,
Yay,
hello.
Mr. Ian Smith. He is the Director of Parks and Recreation for Wilmington. He is in charge of all of the recreational programming for this city's families, teens, youth, and because that's not enough, so he also is in charge of our beautiful park system here in the city. He is a former teacher. He was a D1 track and field athlete and a staunch youth violence prevention advocate. And that's going to be interesting in how that layers into our conversation. He grew up playing in the streets of New York racing, playing stickball and kick the can. I totally played kick the can. I
want to know if anyone remember Kick the Can.
I loved kick the can, loved kick the can. He also spent summers in Jamaica, which providing a different kind of experience and one he would like to provide to our inner city youth here. I remember the press release about you. Okay. And Mayor Pazicki praised you for your infectious energy and enthusiasm. And it was just last June. And so
yes, it was.
right? So it occurred to me that during this pandemic, I was like, well, I want the pandemic of infectious energy and enthusiasm. So please bring that pandemic to the riverfront. We would
Yes, ma'am.
appreciate that. We would appreciate that. He has also served on many boards, like the Browntown Civic Association, Delaware Greenways, Innocence Delaware, the Juvenile Justice Advisory Group, and Light Up the Queen Foundation. So we're very grateful for Mr. Smith being here. I'd also like to introduce you to Aaron Goldblatt. And yes, Aaron. It's very exciting here today. Lots of clapping, lots of friends. He is a partner at Metcalfe Architecture, and he began there in 2002. Aaron is an expert in conceiving and constructing environments for informal learning and play, as well as exhibit design and museum planning. He has worked at Please Touch Museum, the Academy of Natural Sciences, the Wagner Free Institute, and those experiences formed his basis for continuing investigations into creating compelling physical and psychological connections through dynamic spaces. He taught at the University of the Arts in their Museum Studies MFA program for over 20 years, and his work has been featured in many museums and in all sorts of
Weird places.
I didn't say that, weird places, but the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. One of my favorites is the Tree Adventures at Morris Arboretum at University of Pennsylvania. Has anybody seen that? Oh, if you haven't, go. It's amazing, 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 amazing. Let's see, also at the Independent Seaport Museum, the Museum of the American Revolution, and hopefully, one day soon, the Delaware Children's Museum. Here's hoping some funding comes in. He holds a master's in fine art degree from Rutgers University and a Bachelor of Fine Art degree from Philadelphia College of Art. He's a founding member of the Friends of the Rail Park, and I happen to know he's a proud father and grandfather. I know he's proud of those things. And to my left is Nancy Kolb. Yay! So Nancy is President Emeritus at Please Touch Museum in Philadelphia. She is a big deal. She's a big deal.
Oh, no,
She was the president and CEO at Please Touch Museum for 21 years and the director of the Bureau of Historic Sites and Museums for Pennsylvania Historic Museum Commission for 10 years. I got that right too.
Long.
Yes, that's a long one. She has received countless visionary awards and has been an instrumental leader in developing nonprofit leaders and in ACM, which is the Association of Children's Museums, and AAM, which is the American Association of Museums. She spearheaded Please Touch Museum's big move from 21st Street, literally in the shadow of the Franklin, to Memorial Hall, where Please Touch Museum then became, yes, you can clap for that. We're all about clapping, yes.
I'm still taking tranquilizers.
And from then Please Touch Museum then became an anchor in the Centennial District and also in the Parkside neighborhood, which I know was very near and dear to your heart. I was at your retirement party, and I will never forget the then mayor describing Nancy as a force of nature. And I think that's really also what we need, and I hope what we're going to represent up here is that we really need advocates for play that are unafraid and passionate. You know, I think that's also what we need in advocates, right? This ability to be unafraid and speak. So Nancy also is a proud mother and grandmother, wife to Roy for 62 years. I know, that gets a clap. 60, yes.
Next week.
Roy's going to be here soon. We'll all give Roy a hug. And bless her heart, she's helped to supervise me for almost a decade, so.
Not saying a word.
There was a special medal for that. And she actually had the privilege of actually meeting Mr. Rogers. Oh, I know, see? Oh, I know. So I just want to thank the three of you. So you're all exceptional leaders and helpers. So thanks for all being here. So let's kick off our panel. And after, we've got some written questions, but then afterwards too, we're gonna just talk amongst ourselves, and also just feel free to write down questions. Also feel free to play with what's on your table. Feel free to take those home with you. Take the play home. Yes, friends, the puppets. Yes, you can take the little kissing pigs home, that's fine. So we've got our prescribed list of questions. And what I'd like to start us off with is, what does play mean to you? And specifically in your line of work, what has play meant to you? Who would like to, Mr. Smith?
Volunteer me? Okay,
You
all
got
right.
voluntold.
All right. Well, so I am 1 year and 10 days in as Director of Parks and Recreation. I had thank you. No previous experience with working with Parks and Recreation. The director retired and I sent in my resume. And I don't think anyone else thought to send in a resume. And so hopefully I am actually qualified.
You
and
are.
Not the only one who sent in a resume. But, you know, play, depending on the situation, can mean a lot of things, and depending on your age. And so one of the things I want to say is, especially as a black man, you get to a point where you want to start to mature. But that doesn't mean to lose your childlike spirit. So I can recall, and I forget, it's been probably 20 years since I did it, but I think I recall in my early 20s going into a toy store and buying some toys and taking it home and playing with it. And I remember thinking, I was like, yo, this is weird. And I don't really know why I'm doing it. And there must have been some reason why I was doing it, and I didn't even try to figure it out. But then maybe later on, I remember bringing coloring books and coloring, and I didn't even color as a child. So something in me was trying to connect with something. I don't know if it was I was going through something, or I was remembering something and wanted to tap back into something that I lost or gave up. So the first piece is like, what's your age? What is your ability? And what are the parameters to access to those resources to play? So one of the things I noticed in coming into Parks and Recreation is there really isn't an expert in Parks and Recreation. There isn't someone walking around who has these numbers in their head and researched other cities. And we sort of take Parks and Rec for granted because all of us know parks and we played in parks. And you think, how complicated could it possibly be? And so what I like to tell people is as complicated as most of us do not breathe correctly. Most of us do not run correctly. We don't eat. So the simplest things in life we've been doing our whole life and we don't even do it correctly. So one of the things I noticed is that for our ability to allow our residents to play, we're completely understaffed. The infrastructure that we have is not utilized. So I looked at it and said, how do we change the culture that every Saturday from 10 to 12, it's the culture that we all want to go outside and play? How do we work towards that? And what does that mean, like I said, for different age groups? But it's also important that I give that opportunity for my staff. So one of the things that I talk to my staff about, maintenance, who plays with maintenance, right? So recreation gets to have fun, youth and family service gets to have fun, William Hicks Anderson gets to have fun, but maintenance does not get the joy of having fun, and how do you bring those things in? So, so my goal is not only to support the residents and support the children and support She doesn't live here, but my 92-year-old grandmother, my step-grandmother, my grandmother, who just got her degree at 92 years old. Yeah, pretty amazing. But that's also an aspect of play. We could call it education and call it a degree or whatever you want to call it, but it was an aspect of play. So I don't want to go too far and stay on point with the question, but just to stop here and to say play could be something different. It is different depending on your age, your ability, and most importantly, as we get older, recognizing we can also play, and it doesn't have to be just interacting with children, right? We can also play, and it's important for us to remember those pieces. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron? Aaron or Nancy?
Oh, no, you.
So I think of myself as a dilettante scholar of play, taking it very seriously, but I am not a scholar by any stretch of the imagination. For almost 40 years now, and I have to put my glasses on. Defining play is, as we will be continuing to hear all day, is a devilishly difficult task. In my work over many years, I've kind of identified a number of characteristics that are not so much defining it as kind of driving how in my work and how I see it. I believe play is the way we learn. It may be the only way we learn, and that, as you're saying, happens throughout life, forever until you're dead. It always involves risk. Taking risk a little bit broadly as a word, giving it a little broader definition, but it always has some level of risk. If the risk disappears, it's completely uninteresting. It's not play anymore. It also always involves rules. Anybody who's watched puppies play knows that when one nips a little too hard, the play ends right there, instantly. It can pick back up once new rules are established. But there are always parameters, and this is true for 2-year-olds, for 92-year-olds. And then I'm often challenged on what the hell this means, but I think that it almost always involves putting together what you know, maybe about what your body can do, against what you don't know. Maybe what you're not sure your body can do. It's a calculus that athletes go through for every enterprise. It's what a 2-year-old does when she's trying to stand at a table. What do I know against what I don't know? And I have understood this conference to really be focused on children's play, but I can't stress again what you were saying, that how important it is that this is not limited to children. This is throughout our whole lives. And that notion of spectrum, I think, is a really important one, that it never changes. There are responsibilities, there are ways that we as a society assign to adults that we don't assign to children, but that doesn't relinquish the need to play. And now I'm shutting up. Your turn.
All right. I'm Nancy Kolb, and I had the best job in the planet for about 15 years.
Managing me?
No, that was not the best part. Please Touch Museum, I had no idea. I'd been in the museum business for a long time, and I was working in Harrisburg at the time, and somebody called me one day and said, "You've got to come down here and apply to Please Touch Museum." I said, "What the hell is that?" So I looked it up, and found out what it was and thought, yeah, this would be sort of cool. If I wanted to know how things were really going in the museum, I'd leave my office and go out and sit and talk to children. To their mother's everlasting dismay, I'd say, okay, have you had fun today? Yes, but, I said, the mom would say, there are no buts in this. We've had a wonderful time. I said, I'd really like to know what he thinks we need to do better. We don't talk to children enough. We do things for children, we make stuff for children, we teach children, but we don't listen to them. And I think it was the first lesson I learned, and I'm still learning it. You can ask my husband of almost 60 years, I don't listen well. I think children's museums are a very important part of the infrastructure in any community. They were, for the longest time, the fastest growing part of the museum business because, for the most part, we're not collection-based. Please Touch is, but there are a lot of children's museums that don't have physical collections, which is a relief when you're worrying about staffing and taking care of things like that. I have a wonderful story from early on when we were still on 21st Street. I walked back into the baby area, you know, the special area we had that was walled off for children 2 and under. There was a little boy who was about 18 months old. His mom was sitting on a bench, and she was reading a book. Periodically, she'd look at the little boy and say, what do you think's going to happen when you open that door? We had a birdhouse, and the mother bird would feed the baby bird. By the time I got there, he was just going like this to tell his mother what he was looking at. 3.5 hours later, they were still there. Mom was reading her book and periodically would chime in, what do you think's going to happen when you open that door? Kids want it verified over and over and over again, and they want to do the verification. Museums are not good at that. We like to answer everybody's question, give them way more information on the wall. I was in the history business. You ever tried to slow down a historian that's trying to write an exhibit label? That was actually pretty funny. We had an exhibit going up in Harrisburg on the Constitution when we were coming up on the some anniversary of the American Constitution. The script for the labels was 150 pages long. A historian wrote it. We threw it away. I said, and then of course the CEO was also a historian, and he was thrilled with it. I said, this is a book, not an exhibit. And it certainly wasn't interactive. History museums are getting better at this. Art museums have been leaders in developing interactive children's programming, family programming. But please, with your own children and with the children that you encounter professionally, let them take the lead. We hardly ever cede control. Thank you.
We got some claps on that.
I think we assume because we are adults we know better. Pooey. The average 5-year-old knows much more about subjects than we do, or at least has a better way of expressing it. So if you remember nothing from today, just let them take the lead. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And, oh, thank you. On behalf of all my children.
I also appreciate, Aaron, that you mentioned about risk-taking. I think that's something that also, interestingly enough, that the DCM has in common with the Delaware Contemporary Art Center, risk-taking. I think it is tricky to take risks. Ian, you mentioned about taking a risk going into the toy store. You know, I think there's so many things in life that are risky, but I think a lot of times we'll look back on those and that risk was worth it. So we're going to switch gears now to talk a little bit about some of the social infrastructures that support play. And so what I'd like to propose to the three panelists is maybe a two-part question, but what are the social infrastructures that support play, and why are those social infrastructures important? So what are they, and why are they important?
Can I go first?
You can go first.
Only because I really want to say this. The most important infrastructure supporting play is family. Mom, dad, the kids. The rest of us are doing what we can to provide environments for play to cause learning. But it's in the family that it happens best. And that's why children's museums have been so wildly successful, wherever they are, because they're family places.
Yes, you know, and I'll also add to that school, because you end up spending so many hours at school, you end up spending almost more time with your school family than you do with your own family. And if you're lucky enough or not lucky enough, your mom is the teacher, and then, you know. But I know that for me, when I'm looking at Parks and Recreation, looking at our structure, right, and saying I do not have enough staff to do the 10 to 12 thing every Saturday. So I need to partner with Friends of Parks groups. I need to partner with the Neighborhood Planning Council. I need to figure out who are the components that stretch throughout the city and who are organized, and so that I can start to develop those relationships there. You know, and also, there's, you know, this question is so interesting because there's so many aspects that we jump in and out of social play without knowing it, right? Your child is at school telling another child that they're their mother and father, or the teacher's your mom, or I give you, my wife and I don't have children, but we are raising our godson, and he's 3. And we have 3 miniature poodles. And we are trying to train him to use the bathroom. But what he's picked up through social play is when we pick him up from school, we go home, we open up the back door to let the dogs go out, and so he won't use the bathroom at school. So he wants to go outside with the pamper on, but you clearly see him in the corner because all the dogs are doing it outside. And, you know, I'm looking, I'm like, okay.
And you love the dog.
And I love the dogs. And I clean up after the dogs. And so it's these small pieces of what are the experiences that you're providing for your children? Because those things start to allow them to experiment and to experience things. So go into your school, ask your teachers how are they engaging in play. When your children go to the neighbors, ask them what games they're playing. But it's just critical because we fall in and out of our environments constantly. And what are the other environments you're allowing your child to participate in? And how are they creating a safe place to have risk to play? This wasn't the question, but I'm going to state, I grew up, Paris is Jamaican, grew up in the Bronx. And even when I used to work for the Youth Advocate Program, working for kids coming home with handgun charges. And I will tell you that some of that handgun charges stuff, all of that violence, some of it is play. They just don't have access to play in a way that we would want them to play. So I'm talking, you see 2 kids shooting at each other, maybe 5 minutes later, if you see him telling that story, he's laughing. For those of you who've never been that kind of environment, most of us have been chased by dogs. It's not funny at the time, but afterwards you're laughing about it. And so it's, once again, those social, creating those experiences for our children that they don't go out and create it themselves. I remember in the Bronx, this is why I brought up the Bronx, kids used to jump from roof to roof because they wanted the risk. right? And so that's how important it is for us to create these environments that as our children leave from our home and go to school and go to the neighbor down south, downtown, or the cousins, that we create those environments for them, because they're going to create them for themselves, because we all want to feel that thrill. Yes, thank you.
That's to me whoa, wait, I have it in my lap.
It'd be very strange talking to it in your lap.
Don't go there.
I didn't. Yes, I did.
I just want to add one more, and there are many other, the community centers, schools, the home, whatever that looks like. Libraries are, I think, another piece of that infrastructure. Adults who are playful is a pretty key piece. But I want to make it clear, at least to me, that all those things are good. All those things are important in creating healthy civic life, healthy children, healthy adults. But play happens in the worst of circumstances. Play happens in prisons. Play happens in concentration camps. Play happens in any compulsory environment where there's a razor-thin edge of freedom. So it is an incredibly powerful, instinctive piece, fundamental element of who we are as a species. And we've heard it already today. It's something we share with a whole lot of other species, from birds to octopuses to certainly all mammals. It's something that you cannot take away from us. Our job is to support it. And we die without it, literally. That's, to me, when I got your list of questions and the why are these social infrastructures important, first thing I thought of was, duh.
It is. Play is so very important. And also, who has access to play? Access leads to empowerment. We know that. So, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time also, who has access to play and who has access to these infrastructures? That's an important question, because sometimes it's also about asking the questions too. Right? Doesn't mean that we all have the answers, but it's important to begin asking these questions. So I wonder if we could just talk about who has access to play and who has access to some of this infrastructure.
Well, I think the brother just said it, really well, is that we actually all have access, even like as he said, with the very small access to freedom, because there used to be a thing called pet rocks. And people used to love their pet rock. I mean, it meant something to them. You touch their rock, it's going to be a problem. And they're talking to it and moving it, and there's a name. And I remember I used to collect old bottle caps. I remember I used to, if someone was washing their car and they had the water running down the curb, I used to rip off little pieces of grass and put two of them down and let them race down the water. And so it's like this balance of sometimes if you don't have access to the toys you see on TV and the toys that shine and are pretty and talk to you, you will create your own toys. So then as we evolve and we understand science and how the brain works, then we can say we can have a more evolved, purposeful toy. And who has access to those things?
Lego.
Right? And as I look at the city from a Parks and Rec perspective, I see an amazing group of people in Cool Spring and Tilton, and they're a tight community. They go out and raise money, and then I can go to Southbridge and see that's not there. So my job is, how do I get the kids in Southbridge over to Cool Spring, but also how do I get the adults who created that experience in Cool Spring and Tilton to share their knowledge with the people in Southbridge? So it's really about How can we keep interacting with each other? And I want to, this wasn't the question, but I just want to, as a social scientist, it's going to drive me crazy if I don't do this. Okay, if you are playing in here right now, raise your hand. Higher. Yeah, higher. Okay, and so, no, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. And those who are raising their hand, how many of you, your parents are still alive? Okay. All right, so I want to stress the thing. You may think you're an adult, but you're a child. You are a child. And it's, once again, it's thinking about your experience, your connection to your family and your network as you grow older. Thank you for indulging me on that. I just wanted to know. All right. That's what I'll add is sharing knowledge, sharing information. Access really is our brain wants it, and we're going to get it, whether it's safe, not safe, from someone we shouldn't be talking to, someone we should be talking to, someone who has our best interests, or they don't. We're going to play.
If I can interject here, how many of you have been to Please Touch Museum in Memorial Hall? That was an amazing leap. I know the very first group that I met with was the neighborhood. I went to an after-church meeting at one of the community churches. Walked in, introduced myself, and they said, "You're going to take away our playground." I said, "What?" Probably that articulate. And they said, Memorial Hall was the largest surviving building from the 1876 exhibition. It was the art museum until 1927, and then the city got a hold of it. No offense. When we took it on, it had a derelict indoor swimming pool that was slowly but surely destroying the building, 2 basketball courts, a tennis court, a boxing ring, the Accident Investigation Division of the Philadelphia Police Department with 4 jail cells. That was a great debate as to whether or not we'd keep them, and the offices of the Fairmount Park Commission. So the city had looked at it as empty space. I used to work for the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. I looked at it as a really important cultural space, telling a story to Philadelphians that they have long forgotten. They're too focused, by the way, on 1776. It was a labor of love to get that done. It took a lot of funding. We ended up going bankrupt because we had to borrow so much money, but we had a benefactor come and bail us out. The first little boy who walked in the door looked up and went, "Wow." He looked at me, or he looked at somebody else who was standing there and said, "Did you really do this all for me?" And I said, "You bet we did." I wish I'd taken his name so I could follow up with him. It's a play space, yes, but it's also a National Historic Landmark. And there are too many of them going begging, falling into rack and ruin. So if you're thinking of starting one, Children's Museum that is, don't forget the old building down the street, the old warehouse. You know, why should we build a new building when we can save an old one? I would not recommend that you save one quite as big as Please Touch Museum. We actually added 125,000 square feet to it because we ended up with a full-size Denzel carousel that had spent its early life at Woodside Park. I go back there regularly and ride on it. If you're going to be in the play business, you got to like to play. And it's more than baseball or soccer. You know, sports have taken over the word play. I'm very impressed with some of you who are making things out of the clay in front of you. Not so impressed with all of you. Okay, Jen, I'm done.
Aaron, what do you think? Anything about who has access to the structures, infrastructure, or anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
I think that we covered it. I mean, obviously there's a ton of these societal elements that we've named. Yeah, no. This is Aaron shutting up.
What?
Also wondering about any specific spaces that you've created, spaces for play, or spaces that you feel like have really encouraged play that you'd like to share with the group about. And also maybe even spaces in play, for play that you might think might be forbidden or inappropriate. I think the conversation about the prison is an interesting one, I think, as well. Anybody want to talk about that?
This is in many ways the sort of center of my world, and I mean, I would, having spent some time visiting prisons in my career, both in planning, etc., for places for people to play. The saddest place to play that I saw was at Sing Sing in New York, where the children of incarcerated men who could come and visit their dads or their family member had a really pitiful place to play, partly because it was seen by the designers as for them exclusively, as opposed to for the family member with the child. So I would love an opportunity in my life to do a good job on that. But I do a lot of work in public gardens, so the idea of play out in nature, I use air quotes because most public gardens are places there's a lot of intervention on the part of the humans that are stewards. But we also do a lot of work in healthcare settings, in pediatric settings in particular, for both the patients and the families of the patients that need a lot of amelioration, because it's a scary place. And it's a place that typically and incomprehensibly inflicts pain. And by creating places for play, and it's been a steep learning curve for me, where infection control is a whole other order of magnitude than what we have to worry about in our classrooms or even in our children's museums. But I can see it in places of worship. Any place where people gather, and particularly where people gather with children, there is stuff that we can do to engage them in the content of that place in a playful way. So.
Well, I'll say that, so the city, we have a partnership with a few people, and I'm not going to remember all the partners, but I will say former Councilwoman Rashima Dixon, it's connected to her, it's called Play Street, and so it's bringing play to the street. It's a block party. And so, for kids who, for the most part, the city of Wilmington, there's a lot of parks, maybe not so much in the second district, so it's needed there. But yeah, it's an opportunity to shut down a block, people to come outside and play, which normally you don't naturally see residents just throwing block parties. And I can't recall, I lived in Baltimore for 21 years, Bucks County for 6 years. And the last time I saw a block party, I had to have been under 13 years old. So it's bringing that element. But COVID has happened, and I think what that has shown us is how critical play is and how our children, we don't know how it will affect them, but they have missed out on playing, which gave them the opportunity to learn. So really, when my godson was doing the thing with the dogs, I was wondering, I'm like, I wonder how much of it is he's not in school seeing other kids talking about potty training. And just the conversation of hearing it, he's only hearing it from us, which has no context. You know, so we started a thing called Grazing in the Grass, which was a party in the park. Because we just started to recognize that we were not being social, and we know that there's going to be a problem, not just for our children, because we're children too, for us. And so the street was one of the, some of our blocks are one of the places where you traditionally, in this time, you don't really see people playing in the streets anymore. So we'll have some skateboards out there, some double dutching, and we got some people who knees still good to double dutch? All right, okay, all right, okay, all right, I love that. And once again, what's critical about you playing at whatever age you are is your children seeing you play. And listen, it's nothing more beautiful than seeing a grandparent play with their child. That last time that they're going to sprint from light pole to light pole, you know, and creating those core memories, you know, creating those experiences. So it should be everywhere where we don't see play is where we should try to interject playing.
There was a really funny event in, not so funny in context, but when Ida hit this area, there's the main highway that runs east-west through Philadelphia called the Vine Street Expressway, and the pumps that keep it dry all failed. So it became the Vine Street River. And there were people seizing the opportunity at its most sophisticated by taking kayaks and canoes down this, but also by doing double and triple flips off the bridges into this water, seizing a moment to play in a place that is absolutely not playable. It is a highway, and it is lethal for humans. So, of course, the idea of jumping into that water, but okay, you know, risk, takes risk.
Now, I've got more questions, but before, I want to make sure that the audience has time to ask any questions before we have lunch. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, Leslie Schaefer in the back. I acknowledge you. Friend.
Yeah, I think it's the question had to do, as I could hear it, the role that art museums can play. Something I was thinking about during the keynote is that artists, particularly now, in this time we live in. Artists are second responders. And that, we all know what first responders are, but given the existential crisis that we have faced in not just the pandemic, but in our searching for social justice, in the spectacular explosion of gun violence, it's often the artists who are the second responders that allow the rest of us to see our world in more complex, sometimes more beautiful, sometimes more ugly ways, avenues in, and particularly for kids. So I applaud you for poking at that.
I just want to address one more thing about, I think it's also the risk-taking. I think that art museums and contemporary art does such a great job related to play, and that the ability to model that behavior of risk-taking, I think contemporary art and art museums does such a great job. I think also holding a mirror up. I think art museums and contemporary art museums do a great job of that. And also meeting people where they are and helping to further the conversation, which is the perfect example of what happened today. We're not having this conference didn't happen at the Children's Museum about play. This conference about play happened at the Delaware Contemporary. So art museums and contemporary art museums have a great place in meeting people where they are and helping further that part of the conversation. And again, I can only applaud, our brothers and sisters in the art field and art museum and contemporary art field. So I wanted to make sure that was a...
Could I add one thing to that? And the other piece why this is important is because we don't get to define the rules of a game. So what would happen if a child came in here right now? They don't know that's an art installment. They think it's a toy. And so they start creating a game. Maybe they're counting how many red strings there are. They're trying to blow to make it move. And so it's giving your kids opportunities to be in spaces like this and allowing them to just go and create the rules of the games for themselves is the interesting things. When you're in a space you're not told that it's for play, and then you see a child start to play, is those other opportunities that we can't miss.
An opportunity for inspiration. Yeah. Opportunity for inspiration. I hope that, when families and adults and children see these installations, that they can say, oh, I love those colors. Well, tell me about that. Tell me about the colors that you see. Or that you can go home and make your own piñata. So I think art museums and contemporary art just does a great job of inspiration. I know I'm not a panelist. Ooh, I'm sorry, what? Oh. Yes, feel free to find us, your new friends, up on the stage, yes.
Well, I'll say this weekend I did a presentation to the Youth and Family Service Committee. And in the midst of them giving us kudos and saying, hey, you guys are doing a great job and you're touching populations, I said, well, we actually don't really provide anything for people who are disabled. And so I think, as sometimes we just go along not thinking about everyone. And so I know maybe someone in Parks and Rec thought about it, but I know I didn't have a conversation with anyone about it. And I recognize when they were giving us all these kudos, we're like, well, there's a bunch of people that we're not providing services for. So currently, right now, Parks and Rec does nothing targeted specific, but we do have people who are wheelchair bound who will come into the Hicks Anderson to play basketball, but that's not us being intentional about it. So I will take your question as confirmation based on the fact that what I just described, as we need to be doing some more work. We need to be focused on making sure everyone has an opportunity to play.
Yes, ADA has the kind of weight of law of the land. That said, and there are, I mean, I'm actually not a patriotic person for a whole host of reasons, but I think the United States has done a pretty good job at the grossest level of making our streets, our buildings, our building code compliant. We have so far to go. And I hear you, and I know that the notion of involvement in the projects that I work on, and as a lowly bottom-feeding consultant, it's the institutions that I work for. It's their job, and I can prod and poke a little bit, but it's ultimately they're the ones who have to say, no, this needs to be for everyone. And the notion of universal design is what a lot of institutions hear when they hear that term is the same thing that they hear when they think of sustainability. Cha-ching! My building cost just went up 15%. Universal design. Ka-ching! My building cost just went up 25%. And that's exactly the wrong way for us as a society to be thinking about it. That's the way to be thinking about it, is how do we make this for everyone? And it doesn't actually have to do with money. So I would actually throw a question out there for people to think about during lunch. And it kind of turns a little bit of the conversation on its head, a tiny bit. It's something I've been thinking about since I got the invitation. And this notion of social infrastructures, there are social infrastructures out there that I believe inhibit and in fact pervert our access to play. And I would like for us collectively to be thinking about what are those social infrastructures. I'm thinking specifically about gun manufacturers. But I'm also thinking about professional sports. And that isn't an attack, it's an observation. And that's idiosyncratic to me. But what are the infrastructures that maybe we can change or offer alternatives to that have some level of history of perverting or exploiting our impulse to play for monetary gain, for whatever. Let's have lunch.
You can't take my microphone. I'm sorry. Intergenerational. Yes. I love a microphone. Oh my goodness. We could, if you haven't noticed, we could be up here for hours. We are a passionate group. I'd like to thank these three people, these three helpers, these three leaders. Please join me in thanking them. I'd like to thank the Delaware Contemporary again. I just don't think I can thank them enough for hosting this. Please make sure that you keep coming back to the Delaware Contemporary, see all the amazing exhibits. And who has been to the Delaware Children's Museum? And please make sure that you come back. Yes, we'd love to have you.